All right, guys, welcome back for the League series, and we're going to be going over the 13th League, which is Harbinger. So for Harbinger, this is where we really made the big Fall to Oriath push, which we thought we were only going to get Act 5, and we got Acts 5 through 10. So they removed the 3 different playthroughs, and they also added in the Pantheon system. Now, the really big part of this was just the surprise factor, because they had been saying 5 leagues, 5 acts, 5 acts, 5 acts, 5 acts, and we were all sitting there like, well, how are they gonna make 5 acts work? You know, are we gonna have just 2 playthroughs and just substantially more XP in Act 5 or what? And then they threw the wild card out and was like, oh yeah, it's 1 playthrough. And even though Acts 6 through 10 are kind of like reshells of Act 1 through 5, it is a lot smoother than playing the game. So I did want to take a moment to talk about like how big that actually was, and then we can get into our Xena mods. So we had Onslaught, Bloodlines, Beyond, Ambush, Parandus, Nemesis, and Breach, and then Harbinger. So it introduced multiple currencies, uniques, and currency shards. The League introduced Harbinger's otherworldly enemies, which can be defeated by destroying its minions. Harbinger dropped shards of currency items, including shards for currency not normally found in Ray class. All characters and stashes were moved to Standard League and Hardcore League respective when the leagues ended. Characters that died in Hardcore were moved to Permanent Standard League. A little bit about, let me go back, why it was underrated. So when we were originally playing Harbinger League, we were very excited by the sustain, and we were a little underwhelmed with the league. And I think most of that was due to the fact that you had to stay in place. It's the same problem that like Ritual and Ultimatum have. Players just don't like staying put in an area in AARPG. It's not conducive to the type of game an AARPG is, where AARPGs are typically about progression and moving forward, and standing still goes against that natural feel of the game. And you'll notice that I'm going to talk about this more in the leagues post Legacy, because these leagues got more complex. And as they've gotten more complex, some of them have done a really good job of integrating into the core game. Some have had this underlying issue where it goes kind of against the grain of how the game feels to play without the league involved. So the currencies and the uniques, so it added Ancient Shards, Annulment Shards, Binding Shards, Chaos Shard, Engineer Shard, Exalted Shard, Harbinger Shard, Horizon Shard, Mirror Shard, and Regal Shard. The new currencies that added were Ancient Orbs, Engineer's Orbs, Harbinger Orb, Orb of Annulment, Orb of Binding, and Orb of Horizons. The other part that we did not take into account with this league is how good Orb of Horizons and Harbinger Orbs are. They are probably a little bit too rare now. They should be available, like, it doesn't ever feel bad to have too many Orb of Horizons or too many Harbinger Orbs, and it often feels horrible not to have access to these, especially in the, if we're going to continue the Watchstone style, where we're going to have to get map tiers by killing bosses. If we're going to keep that style and not go back to the older style, which was you would naturally progress through T4 to T5 to T6 to T7 to T8 to T9 to T10. Like, if we're going to go to this style, Orb of Horizon is so monumentously undervalued, because it gives you a way of getting either the low versions, or it lets you specifically get the map that you're missing if it is a natural occurring drop at a higher tier. And those are very, very important for getting your Atlas completion. So I would say Orb of Horizons and Harbinger Orbs are actually a little too rare currently. compared to what they should be for a smoother overall player experience. Now, mind you, I have a very different viewpoint towards the game than a developer does. My viewpoint is always going to be about the player and the player experience, whereas a developer has to take that into consideration, but they also have to look at things like the impact to the economy, the impact to players continue playing the game, the impact to players continuing to support the game. So I have a different viewpoint than GGG does, but I think they're open and they appear that they're open to listening to our feedback. So I did want to bring that up, that those two are probably a little under, they're a little too low on the drop table and probably should be moved up a little bit. Not a lot, but like moved up a tier a piece would be excellent. Then the following items, uniques, were exclusive to Harbinger. There was the Flow and Tether, the Factoring Spinner, Tempest Binding, the Rippling Thought, the Anemone Divide, and the Unshattered Will. Most of these are pretty underwhelming today. However, thanks to Harvest, we did get a rework on all of these, which is nice. So there is a link to the league as well as a link to Harbingers themselves. And there is a picture of a Harbinger. It was received mildly positively and implemented. It was probably undervalued originally compared to how strong it really was. And that was mainly because the ease of mapping in 3.0 we thought was just the new mapping system, because they also introduced a brand new mapping system alongside this league. And we didn't realize that it wouldn't be nearly as good going forward. It was probably a much better league than we originally thought it was. However, I would make the argument that it is a not necessary league. I think we can do without the shard system. And if we're gonna keep shards, I think you just keep the big ones, right? Like you just keep exalted shards and you just keep like mirror shards if you're gonna keep shards. Or you relegate them to like beachhead map, which I think is fine to keep in, even with removing Harbinger. Now, if Harbinger spawned all of its monsters instantly, it would be fine. And this is going to be you'll probably notice a trend here on a couple of these, that it's going to be a little more of, if this didn't have this awkward thing, it would be fine with leagues going forward, and it would feel more true to an AARPG experience, something akin to like what you would see in like the old Diablo games, or what you would see in PoE before this point. And it lets you look at a maybe by viewing it in a little bit different lens, it may change your perspective of how you rank some of these leagues, just because while we may think certain things are really good, is it really that is good, or is it this one specific mechanic from it that's good and everything else is kind of bloat? But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. See you later, guys.